On a cold winter night in Washington, D.C., most of the city had already gone to sleep. The streets were quiet, the shops were closing, and a light fog slowly covered the empty roads. But in a small alley near Capitol Hill, one pizza shop was still open. The neon sign outside read **** Pizza Palace ****, glowing red in the dark night. Inside the shop, the owner was preparing to close for the day, unaware that the next customer who walked through that door would change everything. Within the next hour, this quiet restaurant would turn into a horrifying crime scene. A man would be found dead, the floor stained with blood, and the door locked from the inside. The biggest mystery was simple yet terrifying. If the killer was inside the shop, how did he disappear? Marco Antonio was a 45-year-old man who had moved to America many years ago to start a new life. Originally from Italy, he had spent years working in small restaurants across the city before learning the art of making authentic Italian pizza. He worked long hours washing dishes, helping in kitchens, and slowly learning every detail about running a restaurant. Marco always had one dream: to own his own pizza shop someday. After years of saving money and working tirelessly, he finally rented a small place in a quiet street near Capitol Hill and opened a shop called **** Pizza Palace ****. At first, the business was slow, but Marco's dedication and the unique taste of his pizza slowly attracted customers. Within a few years, the shop became popular in the neighborhood. Locals often said his pizza tasted like it came straight from Italy. However, Marco didn't build this place alone. In the early days, he had a business partner named Lucas Brown. The two had started the restaurant together, sharing the dream of building a successful business. But as the shop grew more profitable, disagreements began to appear. Money disputes turned into arguments, and arguments slowly turned into hostility. Eventually, the partnership ended badly. Lucas left the business after a serious fight and disappeared from Marco's life completely. Marco rarely spoke about him after that, and people assumed the matter had ended years ago. But the past sometimes waits patiently for the right moment to return. On the night of the incident, the staff of Pizza Palace had already finished their shifts and gone home. It was close to 11:45 p.m., and Marco was cleaning the counter while preparing to close the restaurant. The streets outside were almost empty, with only the distant glow of streetlights illuminating the quiet road. Just as Marco was about to switch off the lights, the door suddenly opened. A rush of cold air entered the shop as a man stepped inside. He was wearing a black jacket with the hood pulled low over his head. Partially hiding his face, the man walked slowly toward the counter and stopped in front of Marco. In a calm but slightly cold voice, he said, "One large pepperoni pizza." "To go," Marco nodded and began preparing the order without thinking much about it. Late customers were not unusual for the shop, but after placing the order, Marco glanced back at the man and noticed something strange. The customer was standing completely still, carefully observing the restaurant as if he were studying every corner of the place. His eyes looked cold and distant. For a brief moment, Marco felt an uncomfortable sensation, almost like a warning in the back of his mind. But he ignored the feeling and turned back to the oven to prepare the pizza. A few minutes later, while the pizza was baking in the oven, the man suddenly spoke again. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. The question surprised Marco. Most customers never asked personal questions like that. Still, he answered politely, saying that he had been running the place for many years. The man remained silent for a moment before asking another question. "Then you must remember the old people who worked here." Right now, Marco felt slightly uneasy. Something about the conversation didn't feel normal. He looked carefully at the man, trying to recognize his face, but the hood made it difficult to see clearly. Before Marco could ask anything, the oven beeped, signaling that the pizza was ready. Marco turned toward the kitchen to remove it from the oven, unaware that the next few minutes would change his life forever. Around midnight, a woman living in an apartment across the street suddenly heard a loud noise coming from Pizza Palace. It sounded as if something heavy had fallen or a chair had been thrown across the floor. Curious and slightly alarmed, she walked toward her window and tried to look inside the restaurant. But the reflection on the glass and the angle of the lights made it difficult to see clearly. A moment later, she thought she heard someone shout from inside the shop. The sound was brief but unsettling. Feeling uneasy, the woman decided not to ignore it. She picked up her phone and called the police, reporting that something strange might be happening inside the pizza shop. When police officers arrived a few minutes later, the street outside the restaurant was completely quiet. The lights inside the shop were still on, but the door was closed. One officer knocked several times, but no one answered. The second officer moved closer to the glass door and looked inside. The moment he saw the floor, his expression changed instantly. A man was lying on the ground near the counter, and dark stains were spreading across the floor around him. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, the officers forced the door open and rushed inside the restaurant. The scene inside Pizza Palace was disturbing. Chairs were overturned near the counter, and a pizza box lay crushed on the floor. Marco Antonio was lying motionless, and his clothes were stained with blood. Signs of a struggle were clearly visible around the room. Yet one detail confused the investigators immediately. The door had been locked from the inside, and none of the windows were broken. There was no obvious sign of forced entry or escape. It was as if the killer had simply vanished into thin air. Police officers carefully searched every corner of the restaurant, hoping to find any clue about the attacker. But the building was small, and there was nowhere for a person to hide. The cash register was open, yet the money was still inside. This clearly indicated that robbery was not the motive behind the attack. Whoever had come to the restaurant that night had a very personal reason. The investigators soon turned their attention to the security cameras installed inside the shop. The footage showed a man wearing a black jacket entering the restaurant earlier that night. He approached the counter and spoke with Marco, but just 2 minutes later, the screen suddenly went dark. The cameras had stopped recording for almost 7 minutes. When the video resumed, the restaurant was empty except for Marco's body on the floor. While examining the building layout, investigators discovered something unusual behind the kitchen. There was an old ventilation passage hidden near the wall. It was narrow and rarely used, but it connected directly to the alley behind the restaurant. Someone determined enough could possibly escape through that passage without being seen. As detectives continued their investigation, one name repeatedly appeared in Marco's past: Lucas Brown, his former business partner. Records showed that Lucas had recently returned to Washington, D.C. after being away for several years. Investigators checked the security cameras installed in the alley behind the restaurant. Around the same time the crime occurred, a man wearing a black jacket was seen running quickly through the alley. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. 3 days later, police arrested Lucas Brown. During interrogation, he repeatedly insisted that he had not intended to kill Marco. But when detectives presented the camera footage and other evidence, his confidence slowly faded. Eventually, Lucas admitted that he had gone to Pizza Palace that night to confront Marco about the money he believed had been stolen from him years ago. The argument escalated quickly, and in a moment of anger, he attacked Marco. However, before the interrogation ended, Lucas made one statement that surprised the detectives. He claimed that while he was escaping through the kitchen area, he briefly saw someone else standing in the shadows. Police never found any evidence of a third person in the restaurant that night. The case was officially closed, and Lucas Brown was sentenced for the crime. But Pizza Palace never reopened. Even today, some residents claim that late at night the kitchen lights inside the abandoned shop sometimes flicker on. A few people even say they have seen the silhouette of a man standing behind the glass door, as if he is still waiting to serve one last order. And the question that continues to haunt the neighborhood is simple. Was Lucas really alone that night? Or was someone else inside the restaurant when the murder happened?